Good afternoon, everyone, and good morning to those joining us from any of the European time zones. This is the 10th session in our bi-monthly SG Declares and Shares series. In the way of a brief introduction, Construction Declares, now known as Built Environment Declares, is an online petition uniting all strands of construction and the built environment. It started in May 2019 and now has over 9,200 signatories, significantly companies, in various disciplines and in 27 countries across the globe. The number of professionals engaged in the signatory companies is now over 1 million employees. In early January 2020, Singapore joined the movement with both SG architects and SG structural engineers declaring. In June 2020, we set up the SG and Global Environmental Consultants Declare platform. This means that any environmental consultant across the globe who wish to join will be helped by us. About the same time, the Singapore landscape architects joined the declaration. We now have a total of 55 Singapore-based signatory companies with over approximately 50,000 professionals within these companies. I am Hossein Rezai, and I'm happy to moderate today's event with my dear friend, Richard Hassell. Brief word about Richard for those of us joining from planet Mars who may not know Richard. He is the co-founding director of WOHA, an internationally recognized architectural practice based in Singapore. He has served as a board member of Design Singapore Council, the Board of Architects, as well as the Building and Construction Authority of Singapore. For this session, our 10th bi-monthly session, we have the honor of having Dr. Ken Yeang, a very dear friend, as our keynote speaker. Brief introduction on Ken. Dr. Ken Yeang is an architect, fellow member and past president of AM, the Malaysian Institute of Architects, and a fellow of Singapore Institute of Architects. He's also an ecologist and a member of the British Ecological Society. What makes his work compelling is his authentic, signature, ecology-based design. He's an early pioneer in this field and has been working on the subject since 1971. His work advances the principles and systems in sustainable design. He has written over 14 authoritative books on the topic. Ken trained at the Architectural Association in London, then received his doctorate from Cambridge University on ecological design. He's an honorary fellow of Wolfson College, Cambridge, an honorary fellow of the American Institute of Architects, and a distinguished Plim professor at Illinois University. Of the many beautiful things said about Dr. Yeang is the UK's Guardian newspaper naming him as far back as 2008 as one of 50 individuals who could save the planet. Before giving the mic to Ken and asking him to enlighten us with his presentation, do please remember to post your questions in the Q&A box throughout the talk. And after Ken's talk, we will have at least half an hour time where Richard and I will moderate and raise your questions to Ken. I'm done, Ken. Over to you, please.
Well, thanks, Hussein. Thanks for having me at your Singapore event. I have about 15 minutes to say what I have to say. My usual lecture is about 45 minutes, so this is an abbreviated version of it. I'm going to talk briefly about my work, which is Designing for a Resilient Planet. And these are the key principles I will discuss today, which is ecocentricity, which is designing based on the science of ecology, because ecology is the original context for everything that we human beings do on the planet. And then secondly, I'll talk about our current work, which is not biomimicry, but I call it ecomimicry, which is mimicking, emulating, and replicating the attributes of ecosystems to make our built environment as human-made ecosystems. Now, I started to put together my thoughts into a single model for ecological design. And the key components of the model are these 5 constituents: nature, people, the built environment, energy, and hydrology. Nature, because as I mentioned earlier on, it is the context for everything that we do. People, because we are a dominant component of the natural environment. The built environment as a term I use to represent everything that we make as people, not just buildings, but cars, clothing, toys, and so food. Energy is part of nature, but human society needs energy for systems. And it's the production of energy that has caused environmental contamination. And finally, hydrology, because that's the water is the basis for all organic life. And without water, no organic life can exist. And in fact, when astrologers look into the planets, the first thing they look for is signs of water, because if there's signs of water, it means the sign of organic life. So these are the 5 components: nature, human society, water, structure and infrastructures, and energy. These are the key objectives. For nature, we try and have net positive ecological impact. In other words, not net negative impact, but it's now we have to aim towards achieving positive ecological impact. Blue is net zero water design. This is the mistake here. Human society is net human happiness and well-being, and water is net zero waste water. And next one is, this is a jumble. I'm sorry about this. This is the mistake here. Water is net zero water. Structures is net zero waste and emissions. And finally, energy, which is net zero energy. Now, nature is everything that takes place on the biosphere and the planet, which is the not just the ecosystems, but also the biogeochemical cycles and the habitats. And human society, there's the social, economic, political, and institutional aspects of it. There's water, there's rainfall, there's the seas, the waterways, and groundwater, and structures of technology, buildings, and artifacts, and everything, and including food and everything that we make as human beings. And energy, of course, we should try and make it as renewable as possible. But if you look at the top right-hand corner, well, these are the basic components. The challenge in ecological design, the challenge in sustainable design is how to bind all these factors together in a seamless and benign way. So these are the targets, these are the objectives, which I messed up earlier on, but these are the key objectives. Net positive ecological impact, net happiness society, net zero water, net zero waste and emissions, and net zero carbon. So now let's look at the first one, which is nature. Ecology actually is very crucial, it's very important. So if you ask me, what are the first change I would do to society? I would ask that students are taught ecology at school, politicians and the public are educated in ecology, most important, architects. And that is the saddest thing in my life. on what I do with my community of architects is that if you ask any architect today, he'll say, oh, we do green design. But it is shades of green. You know, the green has to be truly based on ecology. And I've just about given up on my generation because very few of architects of my generation are trained with a background in ecology. So ecology is extremely important. So now, ecology is the earth covered by this thin film called the biosphere, where units in nature exist, and the units are called ecosystems, which consist of communities of plants and animals and the physical environment. And ecologists define this as the biotic constituents and abiotic constituents acting together as a whole. And so biotic are the organic, the plant communities, animals, and the microbes. And biotic are the site characteristics, climate, and so forth, and soil. Edaphic is technical terms for soil. Now, what became apparent to me is that we human beings, although we're part of the biotic constituents, part of nature, part of the animal community in that sense, we are the most powerful. We're able to change landscapes, we're able to change the soil, change the waterways, and now we're able to change climate, which is to the detriment of not just of society, but to the planet. And it is, ecologists and scientists say we have maybe about 20 or 30 years left to do something about it, and do something significant about it. It's not just sort of greenwash. And so when I started practice, it was designed to mitigate negative impacts on the environment. Now it is no longer mitigation because we've done so much damage and emissions to the climate and to the planet that it is now a race and rescue mission, because emissions are not, extend over time. We continue to accumulate, and so we have to do something about it. Of course, then we as human beings, we make things. We make more things than any other species in nature. We're actually filling up the planet with stuff. And so then it occurred to me, and should occur to you right now because of the room that you're in, where is the biotic constituents? Now, a lot of architects see putting the biotic constituents for decorative purposes. They put it on the facades of the building. They think it's a trendy thing to do, but you have to see that it contributes towards making the built environment part of the ecosystems. And so the thought occurred to me is that what happens if we make our building into human-made ecosystems or constructed ecosystems? Then there will be a better integration of what we make and do with the natural environment. And so to achieve this, we need to emulate, replicate, and augment our built environment with ecosystem and ecosystem attributes. So these are some of the ecosystem attributes. It's not a complete list. It is a list which is off as much as I could. Draw a list of the ecosystem properties, the biological structure, which you can see here, of biotic constituents, enhancement of biodiversity, enhancement of connectivity, provision ecosystem services, ecosystems biointegration, responsiveness to climate, use and recycling materials, hydrology and management of water, symbiosis in the built environment and with nature, homeostasis and feedback and response of food production. And in nature, ecosystems succeed, go through a process of change. Now today I can only cover maybe about 3 of the top 3, and the rest will be on another occasion at another lecture. And so the challenge then is how to remake our built environment into constructed ecosystems. And to do this, you need to emulate, replicate, and augment ecosystem attributes. And let me explain what this means. So the first property that I'll discuss today is ecological structure. And so I started to look into ways we can put more biotic constituents into the built environment. And this is the pattern, a series of patterns that I drew up as a basis for my work. The first is what I call centralized, where you put all the biotic constituents in one location, whether in the built form or in plan. The second is the spotty relationship, where you have, you just spread it out, like in Georgian London. The first is like Central Park in New York, or Hyde Park, or Regent's Park. Second is a spotty relationship like Georgian London, where you have a series of green squares. The third is a series of vegetated areas which are connected but not quite connected. I call them stepping stones. And the third is a spine with fingers stretching across it. And the fourth is a series of corridors with fingers. And so I used this pattern in my early years back in 1985, when I started to put vegetation in buildings as a guide to how I could make buildings more ecological. And so the early work was the dispersed pattern, which is the Biodiversity tower, which was done in 1985. And I had vegetation on the balconies and the terraces. And so it was an early experiment. It wasn't entirely successful, but it's an experiment. But you have to bear in mind that back in 1985, it was extremely difficult to persuade clients to put vegetation buildings. It's a lot more easier now. So that was this is the master plan. This was the plan for the building. It's column free, so it's about 25 meters between columns, and so that it is ideal for commercial and trading companies where you don't want to have columns obstructing your layouts. So the next is biodiversity. Now, nature is very biodiverse. If you look into our built environment, you look at even in parks, the number of species are very limited, whereas nature is naturally biodiverse. And so as I look at how we can design for biodiversity, you see most sites, especially the Far East, they are really very diverse vegetation, and most of it is the existing swampland or wetlands or rainforests. And they've been cleared. They've been cleared, and then sometimes being cleared for oil palm plantation or for rubber plantation, then oil palm, and now cleared for development. And so this is a useful histogram that shows that biodiversity actually increases as you head towards the equator. And London is about 52 degrees north, which is quite a bit above the equator, and Singapore is about 2.9 to 3 to 0 degree, 2 degrees above the equator. And so it's a very diverse locality. And so our job really, when we start designing, is to create habitats in the development. Habitats can be on the roofs, can be on the walls, can be on the sky courts, and these are some of the habitats we create. This is one of our more recent buildings, which was completed about 3-4 years ago. This is in Putrajaya, which is about, well, the GFA is about 900,000 square feet. And the habitats are in the walls and in the sky courts and on the ground. And here's a building in relation to the bridge. And then it's right next to the access that leads to on the far right is the Prime Minister's office. And then on the left is the access that leads to the Millennium Monument, which was also designed by us about 10 years earlier. Our job starts with creating what we call a biodiversity matrix. And with the matrix, we start with the habitats, which you see here. And habitats, as you can see, is in the promenade between the buildings, on the surfaces, on the sky codes, on the ground, and so forth. Having done a design located habitats in selected locations, we started to do research on the fauna that we want to bring back to locality, because locality has been cleared totally. It was red earth, it was nothing else. The rainforest was cleared, about 20, about maybe 50 years earlier, and then became a rubber estate, and rubber estate becomes an oil palm. Now it is just red earth, and so we want to bring fauna back into the locality, but you could be very careful because the fauna needs to be native fauna, and in case where we have human society, it has to be non-hazardous to human society. So next is to try and do research on the native fauna particular to that locality that will track the fauna. And then from there, we look at the interaction between the habitats, the fauna and the flora, and they give us concept ideas on how to design landscape conditions to make the whole project into a constructed ecosystem. So this is the promenade between the two buildings. On the far left, you see a Ministry of Finance designed by my friend Carmen American, who was also a graduate from the AA, same year as my brother at that time. And this is access down to the monument by the waterfront. From the square, this is actually not square, it's the plaza designed between our building and the Putrajaya headquarters. Then you see the access at the bottom. We wanted to get away from the predictability and monotony of a modernist building. So we wanted to shape the building. And because of its prominent location, we wanted to make it look like a crystal, like a jewel in that particular part of Putrajaya, and to give buzz to the community. And so, but, obviously if you put a blanket glass wall in front of it, it looks, it looks a bit demeaning. So we start to have cutouts where the terraces are located, and people can actually walk out to terraces to look out, and where the folds are in the glass facade, we slice it a little bit so that it has this much interesting concept. But it is actually a double skin wall, and so the idea of we wanted to experiment with the idea of a substitution to horizontal sun shading. And so we thought, let's try and explore the idea of using fritted glass, but the fritted glass are not butt jointed. They are sort of spaced a few inches apart. And between the inside and the outside is this walkway. The inner skin is vertical, it is straight. So, the facet does not affect, usable spaces. And then on the second diagram is the how the fritted glass are located. It's about 50% clear and 50% opaque. Then the third image shows how it looks from the passageway. And so here it is seen from the outside. And then to give it a cultural pattern, to give it a cultural identity, we selected the pattern called the Songket pattern, which is emblematic of the Malay community, of their Songket fabric. And then we put the pattern as the fritted glass pattern over the facade. And then the slits that you see are the balconies. And so here it is, you can see the two buildings, well, it's not, you can't see very clearly, they're chevron-shaped buildings, and that you can see the access to the square. The access aligns with the access down to the monument. So that's why instead of having a single large building, we had to have two buildings to give recognition to the access. And so there's the two chevron buildings, which are not exactly, they're asymmetrical, they're not symmetrical. And then on the right-hand side is the facade facing the west wall, because the west wall has to be angled to address the western sun. So in this way, this is by all means and purposes what I call a bichromatic building, because you can tell the orientation, you can tell where it's north and south looking at the facades of the building, because this is very evidently the west facade, and then the other one is the east facade. And so here you can see the two axes, the boulevard axis going to the Prime Minister's residence, and the other angle axis going down to Millennium Monument, which was designed by us back in 2008. And the monument is next to, at that time, for the waterfront, see across the waterfront, you see the Ministry of Finance, loadings done by Camille of GDP. And to give the monument, the monument was a competition which we won. And the national identity of the monument was based on the national flower, which is the hibiscus. And that, the base of the monument is a ram, which is, you can see the shape of the ram on the one of the inserts there. So the next we wanted to talk about is the energy, because energy is extremely important, because it's the use of energy that is the cause of burning fossil fuels at the cost of environmental contamination. And so we did some energy studies for this building, and that the typical office building uses about 210.52 kilowatt hours per square meter per annum, whereas this building, as a substitution of using vertical glass instead of horizontal louvers, is 136.18, which is about 70% less than a conventional building. So by all means and purposes, this is a low energy building. But what we're doing now is we are heading towards a net zero energy building, which is what we're doing now in Cyberjaya. Now, connectivity is very important, because in nature, everything's connected. And those of you who experience, being isolated from COVID, the whole idea was that you need to be isolated so you don't transfer the virus to other people. But in nature, it is naturally connected. And so for this project, we started to create what we call a connected vegetated system that links the vegetation from the third floor down to a device we call the EcoCell. On the right-hand side is our master plan for the Kowloon waterfront, which is a competition that was done about 20 years earlier. And we didn't win it. I think we got honorary mention. But you can see those little fingers that stick out are what we call pier towers. The piers that stick out where you can put the towers, right into the sea. Now, in the red squares are the EcoCells. The EcoCell is a device that we invented where it brings vertical integration of vegetation into the lowest part of the building. It provides opportunities for collecting the rainwater, brings natural ventilation to the inner parts of the building, brings daylight to the inner parts of the building. At the bottom, you can put an eco machine or a biosphere. And so this EcoCell was a device we invented, or we devised when we did this master plan. And so this is the EcoCell for the Putrajaya building. You can see the vegetation going down all the way down to the basement, where we had about the rainwater harvesting tank at the bottom. And you can see the ramps going down to the bottom. And so these are the principles that I presented today, which is ecocentricity, which is designing on the science of ecology. And my plea to the community and to people who develop the curriculum for schools of architecture is to start with ecology, because if you teach architecture based on ecology, it changes the entire curriculum, because conventionally when you learn about materials in a school of architecture, you learn about how it weathers, how it butts jointed. But if you look at materials, from the ecological point of view, you look at it from source to sink, from source to recycling. That means the ecological impact of extracting materials from the ground, of fabricating it, for treating it, putting it to the site of construction, of operating the built system, and to what happens to the material at the end of its useful life. So, you obviously learn about then other things, like you look at designing buildings, not learning how to distribute energy, but you look about energy and internal infrastructure. We look at how we can make this low zero, net zero energy and net zero water. And then finally, the technique we're adopting is called ecomimicry. Now, of course, everybody talks about biomimicry and biophilia. Biomimicry, we actually wrote an article on biomimicry back in 1976, which was published in the Architectural Design magazine. And we call it ecomimicry, that means we're emulating and replicating the attributes of ecosystems to make them as human-made ecosystems. Yep, sorry, that's the end of my lecture. If you want to hear more of it, I'll be speaking in the third week of March to the Norman Foster Foundation, and you can get the link from my secretary. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Ken. Thank you for that succinct and highly informative talk. I'm sorry we had to limit to 15 or 20 minutes. We would obviously love to hear a lot more from you, and I know that you have a lot to share with us, as you have always generously shared with me and all your other friends as we have met you throughout the years. Richard, would you like to kickstart the moderation session?
Yes, I would.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Ken. That was fantastic, and I think gives a hint of much more to come. Am I right, Ken? This content is going to be in a new book that you've got coming out?
Oh, it's already published. It's the book came out in November last year.
Oh, okay.
Published by John Wiley and Sons, and you can see the book behind me. It's called At One with Nature.
Oh, fantastic. Okay, yes.
Next to it is another book, which is Saving the Planet by Design, by a different publisher. But Saving the Planet by Design is a theoretical book and has no projects in it, because I didn't want to obfuscate the theory with designs. Whereas the right one on the right, the one next to it, At One with Nature, is full of projects. But check it out, because we spent time designing it. The book is actually, architects don't really like to read, so architects like to look at images, and they find the image that they like, they can use to buy the book. And so the book was designed for architects, and every page is a series of double page spreads. And so, one page double spread, you turn the next page is another double page spread. So you find this, an interesting book. It's about 300 pages, and it's
it looks
and it's a collectible.
It sounds really like, yes, we better place an order straight after today. And we've got a few questions that have come in. Question from Lars Ostenfeld-Ryman. Could stuff created by humans be considered part of the ecosystem in the same way we see stuff created by animals as part of the ecosystem?
Well, stuff created by human beings are inorganic stuff. They are part of the abiotic constituent. So they are part of nature, part of everything we make and do. But we have to make sure that when we make these, the impact on the air, on the biogeochemical cycles, on the water, on the sea, and on the land is benign. So that is something that we have to be vigilant about.
Yes, and I think the other aspect of this might be that eventually probably something in the biosphere would find it useful, but maybe not in a time frame that makes it particularly pleasant for humans. So just as the oxygen, when it was first created by the first green plants, actually was very toxic, but finally millions of years later, oxygen is now a key component of a lot of the ecosphere. But yeah, I think our problem with human created stuff is within our species time frame of a couple of 100,000 years, perhaps, it is mostly going to be toxic and difficult to use unless we, as you say, consciously design for it to be able to be used. So is there any standards or systems, Ken, that give architects a guide as to which products to avoid and which ones are toxic?
Well, the 5 basic materials we have to be careful is in our buildings is steel, aluminum, glass, and cement. And so all these have major impacts on the environment, and we have to be careful what we do. And for instance, one of the key factors is the embodied energy and embodied carbon in the material. Now, aluminum has a much higher embodied energy than steel, but the amount of energy required to make steel, is a lot more than the amount of energy required to recycle aluminum. The amount of energy to recycle steel and iron is a lot more than recycle aluminum. So aluminum has high embodied energy. So the factors in selecting materials is not just the amount of embodied energy in the material, but it is the amount of energy required to recycle it. And so it's not a straightforward solution. Now, timber is fine. A lot of people talk about doing timber buildings, and I see people doing high-rise timber buildings in Japan and in Singapore now. But you have to remember that to make that timber building, you have to cut down a tree. It was a living system before, so you've actually destroyed the living system to make the system, even though the embodied energy is much lower than steel, aluminum. So these are things that you have to take into consideration.
Yes, actually, we found out recently there's not really any good way of controlling termites in the timber buildings too, which in cold climates isn't such an issue, but in Singapore we get termite attacks even on the 20th floor. So if the living timber does end up back in an ecosystem of termites and things, it's also quite concerning, I think, for a high-rise system where the timber is the structure.
Yes.
We've got another question here. Do you see it as a possibility to incorporate these ecomimicry features en masse into pre-existing infrastructure in cities to bring in biodiversity, especially in the time frame of 20 to 30 years?
Well, this is something I discuss in my full lecture, and that green design doesn't start with buildings. It starts with the infrastructure. What is happening is that we have architects throughout the whole world building green buildings. Some of them incredibly beautiful, some of them incredibly effective, some of them are very effective, like the passive house designers. But they are connected to the city's infrastructure. Now, what's the point of doing a green building if the infrastructure is not green? And so you should start with the infrastructure. You want to make the world green, start with the electricity system, the energy system, the water supply system, the sewage system, the IT systems, and the mobility systems, the road. If you can make them green at the outset, then anything else you build connected to it, whether it is buildings or other facilities, it makes it easier to make the city green. And so we start, ecological design starts with infrastructure. And if I were to leave one single idea in your head, before today's over, is to think about making your city's infrastructure green. Do that first before you start doing green buildings. And, I met somebody who was saying that he does net zero buildings. That's great. But the infrastructure is not green. So start with infrastructure. I hope that answers your question.
Mm.
Now, in my diagram, I listed 5 infrastructures. Nature's infrastructure itself, human community, technology and buildings, energy systems, and water. So these are the 4 infrastructures. I call them eco-infrastructures that need to be integrated into a whole system. Of course, this is easier said than done, but that is the challenge of ecological design. And so if you ask me, how far have I achieved in what I'm proposing? Probably maybe about 5 to 10% in my life's agenda. And I'm running, we're all running rapidly out of time, both in terms of our lifespan and society as a whole. And so we don't have much time left. We have to do as much as we can. And in my own life, I can only achieve, today, I achieved maybe about 10, 15% of my agenda after I left Cambridge. And there's still a lot more to be done. But there are very few people who can pick up what I do, or want to pick up what I do, and to complete this agenda. And that is the tragedy in my mind of what I do.
Well, we have 109 participants today who've tuned in, so hopefully some proportion of these are willing to take on the mantle. The situation you've raised, I think, is really interesting, and something we've been thinking about a lot too, in that I think the whole 19th and 20th century was about pulling things apart into separate components and optimizing them. We're now talking about putting systems back together and getting things working, between different departments and between skill sets and between fields of knowledge and government agencies. And I think this is a really difficult question, because you need to have a lot of knowledge across many disciplines, and then you need to find people who can convince really top political management, to start getting things working together. Do you know anywhere in the world where there's like a mayor or a prime minister or a president who is starting to look at how to get this done?
Well, I'm not sure, Richard. The former mayor of Curitiba was Jamie, I can't remember his surname now, who was president of the International Union of Architects, was very pro-green. But a few years back, I think the British government, I think in Parliament, suddenly decided that it's important to have greater rules and regulations to make the community, the British built environment, green. And so we as architects are not particularly powerful people. We're just a service industry, and very few people listen to us. But the people who really matter, as you say, who are powerful enough to effect changes, are the politicians, whether they're mayors or prime ministers or local authority leaders. And they're the people we have to persuade, and we have to make them want to change rules and regulations to make the public and everybody respond, to make the world green. As I mentioned, we don't have very much time, and if we don't do something about it now, and not much people are doing something about it now, there's not much hope for the human community. Of course, in 30 years' time, or maybe 60, 100, 50, 80 years' time, the planet will still be there. We'll still have a planet, but we won't have the biotic community that we have now. We don't have maybe the end of the human species, but the planet will continue, and it'll start all over again. And so this is the this is the rhythm. This is the that will happen. So, what we're trying to do is to extend our current generation, our current community of people, and a current natural environment as long as possible before we start destroying it and devastating it. And so future will continue without us if that's the case.
Yes, which somehow doesn't seem that interesting to humans, I guess, once we're no longer in the picture. Ken, if I was a recent graduate or a student and wondering where I could go to learn the skill set to become an ecomimicry professional, is there anywhere you would recommend people go and study where they could capture some of these skills?
Well, there are about maybe half a dozen schools in the world. For instance, Cambridge has, at the Department of Architecture, part of it is attached to the Martin Center, which has a master's degree in sustainable design. And I think your very own Jason Pomeroy, I think, attended that course. It's a good course, and it's not, it's just, as I say, it's as good as any, better than most. There are courses, I think universities, some of the universities in the UK and some of the universities in the US, teach ecology, environment, energy, materials. And of course, those of them are not very comprehensive, but I'm just grateful that they are they are there, they're existing. But over time, I hope that they will improve and become much more comprehensive. So maybe about 5 to half a dozen schools in the world.
Mansam is teaching with Namal Kishnani at NUS, doing an integrated sustainable design postgraduate degree as well.
Yeah.
And I think what's quite interesting about what they're doing is it's not just for architects, but it's for QSs and engineers and even people involved in policy and politics. So it's because I'm trying to build a consensus across disciplines to hopefully effect change by all being aligned on what needs to be done.
Yeah, Namal's very good because he has a very clear mind and good thinker. And I don't know if you know, I was the supervisor for his doctorate when he was doing his doctorate.
Oh, really? I didn't know that. He probably has told me, but I don't recall it. Yeah.
He wrote a brief article in my book at One with Nature. And so I've known him for some time. There are a few other people in Singapore who are very good. There's an ecologist in Singapore who's very good, and there are a couple of ecologists in the US and in the UK. And they're all, but the trouble with ecologists is that many of them are not designers, so they cannot see, apply what they know for design, to ascertain the architectural and spatial implications of ecology and of
and that's why I think your pattern-based approach, which I guess is influenced originally by Christopher Alexander, but I think it's a very powerful device to share ideas, to come up with those patterns that then people can quickly assimilate and apply in different ways. So is that pattern approach something that you're continuing through these latest books?
Well, let me go back a little bit because Chris Alexander is still alive, I believe. I think he lives near Brighton, UK now. He also did his doctorate, I think, at Cambridge University. And his doctorate was called A Pattern Language for Designing an Indian Village, which is a very interesting approach. But he did not take the pattern language further. You know, after his book on pattern language, his next book became a little bit more complicated with social items, I call it. But the pattern language is just a tool. It's a visual model for designing. But you have to go beyond the visual models. You have to become, you know, systemic. That means, you know, how it works as a system, which is what my biodiversity matrix does. And now I am evolving systems of connectivity. You know, we have a very vibrant research program in my office. And that as we're designing, we're doing research. As we're doing research, we test out the designs, we create prototypes, and then we assess it, and these are then put into books. You know, so that explains the books that I've produced, because they basically record the research that we do, and the book serves two purposes. First one is to get feedback from other people. And the second purpose is to facilitate the ideas to a wider audience. And so it's a very full life that we lead as an architect. But an architect actually has a miserable life. It is, you know, it is. We have very long hours, and you know, I work till about 2, 3 o'clock in the morning, almost every day. And now, those of you who are, you know, involved with the profession, involved with teaching, whenever I, at the School of Architecture, I tell the students, "Are you sure you want to be an architect?" Because there are, you know, half a dozen stresses that an architect has to address. The first one is that it's a cash flow driven profession, business, right? Because if you don't complete the job in time, or you do it quickly, you don't get paid. On top of that, you get paid, you know, after you've done the work. You know, lucky we'll get a client to pay us in advance. And I was talking to an architect in the UK the other day, is that when you have a recession, the fees go down. When the recession over, the fees remain down. So that's the first thing. It's a very stressful, cash flow driven profession. Second, it is a delivery intensive profession. Now, if you run an office, you know, like what you have, Richard, you know, every day you have maybe about half a dozen things that your people have to deliver on that day, whether it's a letter, whether it is a design, whether it is, you know, some advice, or whether it is a meeting or consultation. And if you don't do it on that particular day, someone's will get awfully annoyed with you. And so it's a delivery intensive profession. And thirdly, it is what I call people, is the people business. You have to deal with people. You have people coming in every day, you know, people making mistakes, and you know, and how to compensate for it. You know, as an architect, you have to check almost every letter correspondence that goes out, because if you don't, then someone's going to write something which can be contractually wrong, which have financial implication. If you don't check it, then as a principal, you become liable for it. And so these are some of the factors that make being an architect extremely stressful, cash flow driven, delivery intensive, people, you know, people-based community. And so our students in every school of architecture, are you sure you want to be an architect?
Now, yes. And I think actually all the things you've mentioned, I mean, I think
I say that because if you really want to be an architect, you want to be committed to being an architect, then you have to be prepared to take on the trials and tribulations of the profession. And so you must have a true passion for it. Otherwise, it's a much easier life doing something else, become a quantity surveyor or something like that.
But I think I'm struck too by, I think probably everything you showed us today, no one's ever paid you for any of that. I mean, that is a research that's going on that you are funding yourself, and basically probably what's in the fee agreements is, production of this set of drawings or that sort of drawings. And it probably never mentions any kind of innovation or integration of ecosystems or anything in your appointment letter. And so I think that's also an interesting challenge going forward for the profession is, is there some way to make this passion and commitment to transformation into paid consultancy that's not just delivering a set of drawings for a particular development?
Well, we're not, trying to monetize what we do is extremely difficult. And you're so right, Richard. It's nobody pays for the research and the experimentation and the effort and the test evaluation. But we do it because it is for the betterment of the environment. It is, we do it for environmentally altruistic reasons. Otherwise, it is not worth our while. So it really is a very stressful life being an architect, and
it is. Well, I think Ken.
Notes the two architects massaging each other's hearts. We understand. We especially us engineers who have the easiest thing life on. Absolutely no pressure. We tend to leave the office, go to the office around 10 o'clock, leave around 4 or 5 o'clock, etc. But we have another literally 2 minutes, and I would like to ask you one question, Ken, if you can answer within 1 minute, then we wrap today's. And thank you, and Richard, for your participation in this. And that is that, not sort of putting you on the spot, but Guardian named you as one of 50 individuals who could save the planet, and that was back in 2008, around the time of the financial crisis. I just wondered, how would you see the progress you and we have made in achieving that important task of saving the planet in the past 13 years or so, 14 years or so? Is there any hope for us? No.
Well, actually, there are two aspects.
Sorry?
There are two aspects, answers to your question, and I'd like to say something else before we end.
Sure.
The first is that it's very nice, the Guardian, to say all that about me. But, you have to bear in mind that, there are just as many people say nice things about you. There are just as many people who say unpleasant things about you. So you have to take the rough with the smooth. And so when the Guardian says that, you can say, oh, well, that's very nice, But we just get on with life, because it should not affect what you do and what you think of yourself. But then I have, to answer to your question, I have a personal agenda of things I like to do in our work in ecological design. And, it's a long agenda. And as I mentioned earlier on, you only get to achieve, I only get to achieve maybe about 5–10% of what I want to do. And that it'll be, I want to do as much as I can before I start pushing daisies. So that's the first point.
Thank you, Ken. And definitely one of the things that we have always learned from you, your generosity of your ideas. As Richard said, very few people have paid you, if anybody, for most of the work that you've done, but you do that because you're passionate about it and you believe in it. And every time, definitely, I have met you, you've always given me generous advice, even before I asked for. for that, and that is a hallmark of Ken Yeang. And I thank you again for taking part here, and Richard for helping with the moderation today. On the to those who participated in the talk, we have over 100 people on now. A number of questions which unfortunately we didn't have time to respond to, and good conversation going in the chat box. This is the event has been recorded, and it will be loaded up onto the YouTube channel that we have, together with the other 9 events that we've had in the past 2 years. If there is nothing else, Ken, Richard, I close the session unless you want to say something.
Oh, I would just like to tell Ken that, you know, he's had a huge influence on us, and so his work hasn't been in vain. I think we're very committed to following similar directions, and I just wanted to thank him for all his inspiration and research and knowledge over the years. Thank you, Ken.
You're welcome, Richard. I don't know if you know that I was on the Aga Khan jury that awarded the Aga Khan Award to you. And there are 12 members of the jury, and I was the chairman. But the others 11 again were against giving the award to you. So I fought like hell to give it to you, you know. So you owe me a drink or two, you know, when I come down to Singapore.
I've actually heard that, and yes, I've got a drink waiting here for you for when you're here next.
And I just want to add something else which will be helpful to young architects. You see, people ask me, you know, what should I do as a postgraduate degree? And some of them want to go to do urban design, someone wants to do planning, someone wants to do, you know, go to a better design school. And I said, depends on what you want to do in your life, because if you want to go into architecture practice, do a business degree, because we are never taught how to do business at architecture school. Once you leave the architecture school and you hang up your shingles to practice, you're a businessman. And so in my case, and I tell you this because there are 2 things that I did, that within 6 months of my starting practice, I went to attend classes at the Malay Institute of Management and at the Singapore Institute of Management on business management. And that's what I did back in 1976. And that gave me, you know, the leap forward, because there were about half a dozen architect firms who were existent in Malaysia, who were, you know, who dominated the situation, who dominated the architectural market. But you see, by going to a management course, you learn how to do things systematically. Now, it doesn't mean guarantee you success, but if something goes wrong, you go back and say, oh, this is how we would do it. But if you learn how to do business or marketing intuitively, then it is a hit or miss you know, approach. Now, back in 2002, when there was another recession, I took a week off to attend a course at Harvard Business School called Leading a Professional Firm. Now, I was the only one of 2 architects doing this. There was a couple of engineers, but most of them were from the financial world or from insurance. But in that 1 week, you learn everything that you need to do as much as you can to run your business. And so if you're a young architect and you're about to graduate, or you're already graduate, or you're in business together, my advice is to go and learn business. Because then you realize that when you're being diddled by your clients, you know, when you're being taken advantage of, you know, and how to handle your marketing, how to handle your leadership, how to handle delegation, how to handle organization, how to handle you know, your finances, your taxation and cash flow, and most important, how to market. Now, I'm going to end now with this bit of advice. At that time when I started doing marketing back in learn marketing back in 1976, and even up to the year 2000, recently, how do architects differentiate themselves from others? First is by having specialist knowledge. And so if you have specialist knowledge in something, that people say, oh, well, he's an expert or something. Second, by efficient delivery. Now, these two things will give you the competitive edge, but no longer, because everybody has specialist knowledge. Everybody, does green design, if you like, and everybody claim to do efficient buildings. So what is the next thing that differentiates us? To me, it's very simple. It's innovation. So you have to innovate in your work. And it's innovation that people value, innovation that will take you to the next generation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ken. Thank you, Richard. And we will have our next session of SG Declares and Shares in 2 months' time, and information on that will come out. And we look forward to seeing you, all the participants. Please spread the word, and thank you very much. Bye-bye.
You say bye.
Thank you.